A very disturbing case. It's the case of a guy called Robert Brown. He used to be a British Airways flyer, captain, a pilot. He basically, at their home, he hammered his wife, Joanna Simpson, to death while his kids cowered in another room, their 2 kids. He then took the body of his wife and stuck it in the boot of the car and the kids, put the kids in the backseat, drove to a nearby Windsor Great Park. And while the kids played in the grass, in the woods nearby, he dug a grave into which he put the lifeless body of his wife. Now, for that horrendous, it was manslaughter for some reason, that's what he got away with. He got 26 years for that. He served 13 years of that sentence, and he's going to be released in November. For some reason, because it's manslaughter, he doesn't even have to go to the parole board, apparently. Now, you know, I'm all for leniency and compassion, but surely this man deserves to serve more than 13 years in prison. Let's speak to the founder of the Fly Anyway Foundation. She's a domestic violence survivor and campaigner, Danny Wallace. So good afternoon, Danny.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, you got my point there. Poor Joanna Simpson, the mother of 2 children, hammered to death by her husband, an elevated member of society, a captain for British Airways, don't you know?
No less.
And then, you know, well, the poor kids are basically cowering in another room. Then he puts the kids into the car, puts his wife in the boot, drives to Windsor Great Park, and while they're playing in the grass, he digs a grave for their mother, and he's just going to serve 13 years for that. What kind of message does that send out on the domestic violence front?
I think that kind of speaks for itself, Kevin. In all honesty, it's an absolute travesty what's happening. In the abuse that had gone on in that household in the run-up to the event was consistent and coercive, and there's evidence to that effect, and it was talked about as part of the trial. He was sent down on diminished responsibility, which in itself is an absolute travesty, and then 13 years later into a 26-year sentence is being allowed, or the proposal is that he's been allowed to go free without speaking to a parole board. Now, when it comes to perpetrators harbour resentment over time, and as part of this trial, this attack and this murder, which is what it was, stemmed.
Well, not technically, I have to say.
Technically,
I take your point, but we have to be legally accurate.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's another debate. Why on earth did he get away? Can you just bear with me for a second, Danny? Because we're going to play some footage of the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, yesterday talking to Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC about this very topic.
Right.
You know what, when it was one of the first meetings I had as Justice Secretary, and it was so appalling to hear what happened. I found it personally very painful to hear, and you know what I said is I will do everything I properly can within the law to keep the British people safe and to ensure there is justice in her case. There is not much more I can properly say, because there is a danger that, frankly, you prejudge issues. I'm not going to prejudge them. I will address them as I can, but she has the family have my word, and Hetty, her friend, has my word. We will do everything we can to keep her safe and to ensure there's justice in her case.
And what he's talking about there, Danny, is he is the one person in this country who conceivably can stop Robert Brown being released in November, it would be. I mean, are you happy with what he said there? Because it seemed to me he's hedging his bets a bit.
Is very much hedging his bets by the sound of it. And this is because, and this happens right the way across incidences of domestic abuse, whether the perpetrator has been convicted or not, as the case may be, is that it remains so ambiguous when it comes to charges. It remains so just ambiguous is the case, and in the favour of the perpetrator and not the victim every single time. And so he knows that chances are, because of the ambiguity, because of the way that these things tend to pan out, it might be that it'll just go in the favour of the perpetrator. And so he doesn't want to leave himself wide open. So he can say and pay lip service to the fact that he's going to do everything he possibly can. What can he possibly do when the system is actually set up against and not in the favour of victims, which is what it should be? But it is sadly a case again and again and again, it isn't so.
Well, the government once successfully stopped the taxi rapist John Warboys from being released. The parole board was going to release him, but the government did successfully step in there. The government tried to stop the release of Colin Pitchfork, who raped and murdered 2 schoolgirls back in the 80s, I think it was. That failed, and he was released by the parole board, only to be found hanging around outside a girls' school fairly soon afterwards and returned to prison. Gary Glitter, not the same kind of a case, but, you know, he got released 13 years earlier, half of his sentence he'd served. Only to be returned almost immediately for going on the dark web and trying to access pornographic pictures of kids again. So, you know, this releasing, this sort of almost obsessive releasing of people who are clearly dangerous men is a problem, isn't it? And this guy, Robert Brown, I don't want to be a kind of lock 'em up and throw away the key type, but he shouldn't be out this quickly, should he?
No, absolutely not. And what is, in this particular case, everything in terms of him being a perpetrator of domestic abuse, which is what this case is, perpetrators hold on to things. They hold on to things over the course of time. So what's to say he's not going to come out and find somebody else to blame? He obviously has issues with regards to how he manages his emotions, if he has diminished responsibility with regards to how he deals with himself and emotions. Who is he proving, to whom is he proving that he is indeed safe to be released? Certainly not a parole board who should be making that decision.